Welcome to the Inner Athlete Podcast. I'm your host, Trent, and this is the show where we dive into all things youth athlete development, strength and conditioning, and the mindset needed to thrive on and off the field. Whether you're a parent looking to support your child's athletic journey, a coach seeking fresh insights, or an athlete ready to take your game to the next level, you're in the right place. Before we jump in, make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated on our latest episodes. If you enjoy the show, please give us a like, share it with your friends, and help us reach even more people who can benefit from these insights. Together, we can empower the next generation of athletes to perform at their best. Now, let's get into it. So welcome back to the Inner Athlete Podcast. First of all, please forgive me for my horsey voice. The flu has bitten me really hard in Melbourne, but I do have an international guest. I think everyone who comes onto the podcast is a special guest in their own right. So I've got Brandon from SOMA Performance and Fitness. First of all, thanks for jumping on the call with me.
Awesome, Trent. Yeah, I'm super excited to be here. So I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, and look, the reason why Brandon and I have actually are on this podcast is, he was listening to a few podcasts and we kind of came up, and it's great to actually link with other professionals, literally on the other side of the world. They have very similar mindset when it comes to, I guess, coaching and raising the next generation of youth athletes, and and really helping and supporting the kids and the parents and also the sports coaches in order to make sure that we're setting them up for long-term success, not just in this short interim, in high-level programs that kind of utilize them because they're really good, and then for some reason they burn out. We do get a lot of that, and I'm sure you've come across a lot of that as well at the moment. These are still human beings, and we have to treat them as such. Sport is just a part of their life, but not their life, essentially. So, first of all, Brandon, give us a quick rundown of your background, and then where you're located, what you do, and then we'll rip into it.
Yeah, cool. So I originally got into strength conditioning in college. So I had a degree in exercise science with a specialization in strength conditioning. I graduated actually from the University of Connecticut, and I don't live in Connecticut anymore, but I'll touch on that in a minute. I started working with athletes pretty much right away. I was an assistant high school basketball coach for a while, so I kind of utilized the skills that I learned in college to train those athletes, although I wasn't necessarily working professionally as a strength and conditioning coach at that time. And then a few years later, so in 2014, my wife and I moved out to Colorado, and that's where I got a job at a small sports performance facility and really started to dive into my career as a strength and conditioning coach. About a year and a half later, I left. I started my own business with a business partner. We ran that business from December of 15 until June of 2020. And then we closed that, and I started SOMA at that point. And I actually was running the business out of my garage for 4 years. And then June of last year, we got into a training facility. And I have another guy that works with me as well. So we've been chugging away in here for a year, a little over a year. But we work with athletes generally 10 to 18, sometimes a little bit younger, just depending on their maturity and ability to, adhere to a strength conditioning program. We specialize in helping athletes improve speed, strength, and confidence. Those are kind of the big three that we talk about, right? You work for the first two, and then you gain the last one as a result. So, as we're helping athletes get stronger and faster, they're becoming more confident, which is really something we value a lot. We've been here in this location for just over a year. We're in the Centennial area of Colorado, so definitely a good distance from you guys. But if you've never visited Colorado, it's definitely a place to come see. And I feel like Australia is that on my list as well, a place that I definitely want to get to someday for sure.
Yeah, Melbourne. We're located in Melbourne, and Melbourne's like a sporting hub. It's massive. We got Formula One, we got the Australian Open, obviously Australian rules, rugby league. We got obviously the soccer, and then in 2032 Brisbane, which is the capital of Queensland, which is up north, a lot warmer than we are now. They'll be hosting the Olympic Games.
Oh wow!
So nice. You've got LA coming up, and then you've got Brisbane. So there's not much time for Brisbane to actually to pop off, and they're investing a lot of money in terms of, again, the resources available for that to occur. Yeah, tell us some of the sports that you work with. So give us a bit of a rough idea of like the type of athletes that come through your doors.
Sure. Yeah. So we work with athletes, honestly, from just about every sport you could think of, right? Ice hockey to your main field sports. So soccer, basketball, baseball, football. We work with swimmers and divers as well. So, those that are on the field, off the field, kind of the full range. And, we always have our athletes come in, we do a thorough assessment, testing session of them. And then we do kind of a needs analysis from there. We look at their sport, kind of the common demands of their sport, also the common injuries of their sport, right? Because as you know, as strength and conditioning coaches, one of our big responsibilities is trying to keep athletes healthy, right? I tell people all the time, like, doesn't matter if you're the fastest, strongest person on the team if you're on the bench with an injury, right? Like, you're the fastest person on the bench at that point. So we want to keep athletes healthy. So we work with just about any sport you can think of. I would say predominantly right now we probably work mainly with basketball, hockey, lacrosse. Those are probably the big ones that we see the most of. We don't see a lot of football. Usually schools kind of feel like they have that figured out, and football coaches historically feel like they can handle the strength and conditioning side of what they offer to their athletes. So we don't see a lot of football players, but I would say those other ones are the kind of the main ones that we see the most of.
Nice. And I think part of the reason why we kind of get along and we see the same things is obviously we work with a lot of adolescents and preteens coming through our doors. And that's what we're really going to like dive deep into for today's podcast is, dealing with the complexities of, I guess, working with adolescents. They've got school, they've got training, they've got competitions, they've probably got a second sport, they've probably got a third sport, in the summer. And then they're growing and developing, and they're starting to become more formalized within society as well. And it's like, how do we actually help these athletes in order to, I guess, thrive? And like you said before, is developing that confidence, developing competence in skills and behaviors develops the confidence in order to execute on X, Y, and Z within sport and life. And there's something that you mentioned to me a little while ago. It was about your involvement with an eating disorder center. And for us in Australia, just to give you a bit more context, there's always going to be specific sports. I think track and field, cycling, swimming, gymnastics, and even with women's sport as well, where the way that someone's built, a lot of coaches see that as how they're likely to perform on the field. So how do you kind of like, first of all, talk to us about the eating disorder center, and it's like, and then how do they work with adolescents?
Yeah, so the eating disorder center that we work with is one of only a couple in our country that has an athlete-specific recovery program. So up until recently, it was only an adult program. So they didn't have an adolescent unit there until somewhere between 6 months and a year ago. But what I'll say is, when athletes would admit into recovery, right, they would have to reach certain markers, right, in order to be cleared for training. Then we would see them, we would do a consultation, and then we would gradually, reintegrate training into the recovery. And one of the things that they've seen is athletes specifically are more likely to prevent relapse if they integrate training into the recovery. And one of the reasons, or a couple of the reasons, is one, they don't try to get through recovery as fast, right? If they know they can continue to train, they won't try to just race through recovery to get back to training, which if they do, they cut corners and they don't get the full effect, right? So that's super, super helpful. And then we also really help them rebuild the mind-body connection to know how intensely they're working at any given time. Because as we know, as strength and conditioning coaches, it's not always about a 10 out of 10 every single time you go into a training environment, right? Sometimes we need to have deload sessions. Sometimes we need to have, tempo work or intervals, right? Like, we need to be able to regulate intensities and change intensities. And then if an athlete isn't able to acknowledge those intensities and understand what feeling at those different what they feel like at those different intensities, it's hard for them to train that way and get the best effect. So what we see, to go back to your point a little bit, is, eating disorders can get anyone from any sport, right? But definitely those very weight dependent sports, right? Anything that has a weigh-in involved in it, is something that is high risk for eating disorders. Body image is a big thing, right? And, when we look at female sports specifically, you can have a male and a female sport, and for some reason, the female sport wears a lot tighter fitting, more revealing clothing. So young females feel the pressure to look good, right? Like nobody wants to look bad when they're out there in front of people, trying to perform. So that puts a lot of pressure on especially young female athletes to look a certain way. And we know that, our culture and our society, phrases looking thin and lean and those types of things, where there's a way to train and eat in a way that can present those ways in a healthy environment, right? But it really lends itself to the eating disorders, which is a really tough situation for athletes to get out of when they really let the eating disorder dictate how they train. So we have started to see adolescents now that the adolescent unit is open at this specific eating disorder center, which is called the Athlete Edge program at ED Care in Denver. If you're ever interested in looking that up, but yeah, it's a pretty cool program. It's a lot of fun. We've worked with high level Olympic athletes to now high school athletes as well there.
What would you consider like the common thread of people leading down this path of having some level of disordered eating or eating disorder? Like, what are the common traits that you normally would see?
Yeah, I would say the biggest factors are environmental and people in their world putting certain pressures on them, saying certain things. Trauma is a big thing that can cause eating disorders as well. And there's a number of different types of traumatic experiences people can have that would cause them, because the biggest probably underlying denominator with eating disorders is control, right? So like someone has probably felt a lack of control somewhere else in their life, and again, that can be very, very trauma related, or if it's parents or family members who are influencing them and controlling things about their life. An eating disorder is a way to control something, right? So I can control the amount that I eat. I can control the amount that I train, right? And generally they go hand in hand, and we see a lot of overtraining, right? So overtraining, underfueling, which the body is a miraculous thing, right? So early on in that cycle, people won't see super negative effects right away. Some people feel like they're performing the best they've ever performed, but it's not sustainable, right? And the body eventually goes into overtraining, and then we start to crash. And then that's where we start to see, performance goes down, mood, stress levels, sleep, right? All these different signs and symptoms of overtraining that cause people to be in a very unhealthy state. So I would say the underlying, usually there's some trauma related that's causing them to feed this control, perfectionistic approach. A lot of times we hear athletes who are like, they stopped enjoying. It was like they stopped enjoying training, and they stopped enjoying their sport. And it was more like this, I have to do this even if I don't like it. And they just drive themselves into the ground essentially. But yeah, I mean, that probably doesn't do full justice to the complexities of the different cases, but I would say some of those main underlying factors are generally those different things.
And I think for parents, it's actually really important to actually acknowledge these types of, I guess, key factors. You always hear stories like, I work with a swimming club. They're focused on, oh, I've got to, be a certain shape or be a certain build in order to perform really well. And I think that's where, I guess, strength conditioning coaches can kind of come into play. Is like, if the goal is really to perform on the field, is utilizing, testing and metrics in order to measure, are you actually making progress? Yes, no, why not? And find those early signs and symptoms of overtraining. So if we use a counter movement jump as a screening tool on a weekly basis, we can kind of catch it relatively early, especially for the training with someone who understands of the signs and symptoms of overtraining. Parents, on the other hand, they might see this that they're just tired, the kid's just tired, fatigued, big day at school, and they they don't sometimes see the pattern of that behavior. Are they falling asleep in class? Are their schoolmates actually seeing them falling asleep in class? Is their output in the gym dropping? Are they more susceptible to just being like almost like clumsy as well? Are they more like short fused as well? If you kind of, you're used to joking around with them, and then for some reason they kind of bite back at you, like it hits almost like a personal string with them. And it's like, all right, there's probably something going on that we're aware of, or they're less chirpy in the group, or, I think there's a lot of things that strength and conditioning coaches can see, and we're aware of the signs and symptoms, and then we can start to report back to the parents. It's like, hey, your kid probably needs rest. This is why X, Y, and Z, A, B, C, and potentially their grades might be in conjunction with that as well. Of there's a decline in their performance in school, or there's no improvement in that sense.
Yep. Yeah. And I think, we as strength and conditioning coaches see how the different cycles of kids, and you always have to look at everything, right? Because right now we're transitioning back into the school year, right? So I know over the next couple of weeks, kids are going to come in a little bit more tired, right? And I can't just directly attribute that to like overtraining. It just means, hey, they're up later, or they're at school, their brains are working a lot harder, right? But to your point, if we see those things continue over time, we know that they're not getting the recovery that they need. And having those conversations, especially with the athletes, is important, but making sure that the parents are on the same page too, because as much as I talk to parents and they're always like, well, we want to make sure they're not doing too much, and that they feel there's equally as much like, okay, kid, like if you want to be at the top, you've got to be doing more. You've got to be practicing more. Oh, you say you want this, but you don't do this at home, and you're not doing this and you're not doing that. And it's like, okay, yes, like we've got to be able to find a balance. But I think one of the messages to the parents is how important their words actually are. Like kids, even if they're like resistant to parents in a lot of ways, there's a lot of weight in what parents say. And a good example of that, and this story has probably gotten changed and convoluted over time, but what I can remember is an Olympic level runner came through the eating disorder center, and she had an older sister who was a really good runner as well. And these are distance runners, right? And she was going into puberty, the older sister, and the younger sister heard the dad or somebody having a conversation that was basically like, well, she's going to start to get slower now that she's hitting puberty, right? Because she's going to probably put on some weight, and she's getting more hormones, and her hips are going to change, her body's going to change, right? So this girl who was, younger than probably 10 at the time, or maybe around there, right? Pre-pubescent, basically told herself she was going to prevent herself from hitting puberty. And she went into a very deep eating disordered state where, you're just not healthy, right? But again, the body is so crazy that, this person performed at a very high level for a long time, but even as an adult, they look like a child for the most part, right? Because of all the delays in development due to the malnutrition, and basically feeling like, oh, I'm going to get slower if I hit puberty, so I want to prevent that from happening. How can I do that, right? That, one conversation that this kid heard changed the trajectory of their life in a lot of ways, right? So understanding that support from the parents and encouraging your kids and seeing those signs and symptoms is important, because as coaches, we might see them twice a week, right? But parents are seeing their kids all the time and need to be able to identify those things too. So educating the parents is big for that as well.
Yeah, I was going a little bit sidetracked. I was watching a clip on social media. I was talking about parents are becoming almost like the player manager now. Like they're gonna know so many different roles, and like set it in order to set their kids up for success, which we'll kind of talk about in a little bit. I wanted to move on to recovery. You kind of alluded to it as well, as recovering more and training less, and why sometimes a less is more approach is actually going to be more beneficial in the long terms for a lot of youth athletes that come in through the door. And I guess the challenges that we start to see as S&C coaches is like almost like this underfueling and overtraining cycle kind of comes into it, as we alluded to our first point of discussion. And then And then how do parents actually start to manage that? And then kind of like what's the potential outcomes or the negative consequences of continuing doing more is more, or having that mentality of more is more?
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate because it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Like you want athletes to be really motivated and dedicated and determined, right? Like all these great qualities that they're going to do work on their own too, right? Like we know as strength and conditioning coaches, again, if we see them 2 or even 3 days a week, they need to be doing things outside of there to really maximize everything they're trying to accomplish. And that is sport related as well, and not just strength and conditioning, but sometimes you find yourself trying to hold back these kids who are so heavily motivated, and you almost feel bad because you're like, I want you to want to continue to work and do more, but you're almost doing too much, right? Like I have kids who are on a full training program here with us, and then they go to the gym every day they're not here and do more stuff. And I'm like, no, yes, you're getting benefit while you're here, but the main benefit happens when you recover from what you're doing here. So if you never give yourself time to recover, then you're never going to see the true benefit. So knock it off. And they wonder why their numbers are staying the same and the metrics aren't improving. It's like you're doing too much. You're not letting yourself recover, right? So being able to talk to the kids about that, and one of the probably big factors that I think is really, really important, and we utilize this in the eating disorder center as well, but in our general population too, is listen to your body, right? Like you have to be able to understand when you need to push through because it's hard and you can do it anyway, and when you need to say, oh no, my body is really telling me like, hey, I need to chill out and I need to relax and I need to, go for a nice easy walk, not in 100-meter intervals, right? Or something like that. So that's one of the things we talk to our athletes too. Like sometimes they'll come in and they know here how we operate, right? So I've had kids come in and be like, hey man, I know we got legs today, but I had this yesterday and my legs are super, super sore. And I'm like, all right, so listen, is it in your best interest to take it easy on your legs and focus somewhere else today? Or do you feel like it's something you can work through safely and effectively, right? And if they're like, I think I should take it easy, cool, right? Like we know our athletes good enough to know which ones would slack off and which ones we know work hard all the time and just need a little bit of a break, right? And that's the art of coaching, right? Is knowing your athletes, knowing their personalities, knowing how kids need to be pushed, and being like, that's the old school coaching mentality that I think sets kids up for failure, is like, shut up. Like, who cares what your body is saying? Like, you need to do it anyway, like no matter what. And then kids are getting hurt, right? And they're overtraining, and it's just it's a big mess. So really helping kids understand it's okay to listen to your body. You need to fuel properly. You need to hydrate, right? These are things I think kids are getting more in tune with, because I'll have kids come up to me and say the craziest things about nutrition sometimes. And I'm like, I mean, I'm glad you're interested in it. That's cool. That's wild though. Like, no, you don't need to do that, type of thing.
Yeah, I find that to be true as well. They love social media. It's like they see like one of their favorite like athletes and doing promoting some sort of supplement brand or something like that as well. It's like, I'm glad they're engaging with the content,
right?
But then it does give us an opportunity of like, okay, if you're going to do that, do this instead. Later on down the track, we can look at doing something similar to that as well. So just kind of like, obviously you're not dismissing them, but you're just kind of like making the suggestion this would be more appropriate at this point of your career. Then later on down the track, we can go something a bit more down that rabbit hole. But as we know with social media, there's so much context missing as well.
Yeah, right.
Which is another rabbit hole. And then one of the things that I've spoken to some of my coaches about is changing the language around recovery, because recovery is like, oh, I've just got to sit on my ass and go to I'll do something like too easy. And sometimes recovery may not actually be that. We actually need to treat it as more like your training. So it's almost like, yes, it sits in the training umbrella, but is just a component of your training to drive what we want specifically to happen. And what I have actually started to do with a lot of kids that are wanting to do more, but for whatever reason they can't sit still or anything like that, is actually creating a framework of what they can do on their off days. So say if it's like one of my basketballers, I want you to go to an indoor facility and go to a shooting bay. just work on your jumper, for 30 minutes, get 250 shots in or something like that. At least they're feeling light and loose and feeling really good, and like they kind of like get rid of that itch to do something in relation to the sport. If it's something like soccer, they might be in the backyard, just working on their juggling and handling skills. Just they got a small space. It's kind of like more self-paced, self-managed, and just providing some level of parameters around what they can actually do. Because we know it's still going to be low intensity. It still gets them to tickle that itch as well of them wanting to do more, but it kind of focuses on saying, hey, you should not train, or I need you to not train. It's like, hey, we can do this instead. Or, take the dog out for a walk or something like that. Or, go do some bouldering with your friends, or go to a indoor trampoline center, go do something, fun and recreational almost, that gets their energy out, that they feel like they're doing something physical, that actually still leaves them feeling pretty good moving forward. And that's something that I've noticed from that perspective. It's actually been quite successful.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's such good advice.
And then I think with parents as well, sometimes I love the old school parents. It was like, back in my day, we did this, we didn't complain, we just did it what coach said. Right. It's like, that's great and all, but the parents sometimes forget what life was like and comparing to what their child's life is like now. The child's life is so structured and regimented. It's almost like they've lost the ability to be creative. I remember as a kid, I would ride from after school, ride to my mate's place, during the summer, during school or after school, and we just go swim in the pool. We played games, right? And we just kind of just mucked around, and then we'd play a PlayStation or something like that afterwards. Like, we just did general play. We rode our bikes. We'd race each other home. It was just fun. But we're still developing, general physical characteristics that would serve us later on down the track without even noticing that. I think we do lose that component, because it's almost like the parents have become like the mummages, if you want to call them that. They become the taxi drivers. They're shuttling them everywhere. They got to do this at this time, this at this time, this at this time. So I think the creativity and the outside play is kind of really being lost, especially in one of those pre-teen ages where everything does become a lot more structured. More training sessions, more one-on-one sessions. It's like, where's the downtime? Where's the spending time with your friends? And some of the parents that I've spoken to now that play representative level basketball, they're starting to find that sweet spot now. Like, the kids can go out, with their friends on the weekend instead of, and then they'll have training in the afternoon. So at least they're going out, being social, rather than being so structured and regimented with just one sole focus of, I want you to focus on becoming the best basketballer ever. And it's like, you got to have that mental break in order to have the drive to come back into the next session.
Yep. Yeah, it's so true. And that's one of the things we work on with the athletes that we see at the eating disorder center, right? And I bring that back in because these are people that have competed at the highest levels and have worked with all those pressures of training so much and so rigorously over time. Is we actually have a group that's called Joy in Sport, which is basically helping them get outside of the rigorous nature of training and just enjoying movement and sport and games and things like that, where it's not super structured, it's not super competitive. It's kind of funny because sometimes we'll play a game that people know regularly, right? Whether it's bags or cornhole or certain frisbee games or things like that, and we'll just throw the rules out and completely change everything. And that's hard for some people. It's like, no, we need to follow the rules and we need to compete. And that's just going back to like breaking that, like that perfectionistic, rigorous, chain of thinking when it comes to everything has to be so regimented all the time, which I think is one of the hardest parts of youth sports culture right now, is the pressures that kids feel to constantly be doing something, and they're constantly having things put on their schedule to do, right? Like, there's all these opportunities to continually be practicing and working on your sports and your skills that kids feel like if they're not doing it, they're missing out, right?
And I think that kind of goes back to the point of like, parents say more is more. It's like, more of what? That's a wrap for part 1 of this episode on the Inner Athlete podcast. We've covered some incredible insights today, but there's still so much more to come. Make sure to tune in to part 2 for the rest of the conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, give us a like, and share it with your network to help us reach even more listeners like you. Thanks for joining me, and I'll catch you in part 2.